Hello there, this is John Sluice with Entrust CPA. Thank you for joining us here. Today we're going to start the first of several mini segments of detailing in on some of the impacts of the OBBBA. More specifically, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I'm going to say OBB for short because let's just say that's a mouthful. Before I dive into the details, one thing I do want to mention is we're taking a nonpartisan approach. Right? We're not focusing on Republican or Democrat. What we're focusing on is the economy and the impacts. So throughout this, you'll have your own views, and I get that, and quite frankly, I do too, right? But I want to keep this as political neutral as I possibly can to give you the facts and circumstances that relate to you and how they will apply to you. Okay, so some quick context about the OBB. It was signed into law on July 4th, 2025, so recent here. And it will go into effect this year for some things in 26 and some things as late as 27. So with a normal course, it takes time to work its way through. So many of you aren't going to see an immediate impact on this, but more of a tax planning impact. So some things are going to go into effect this year, some into 26 and some into 27. This topic, what we're going to be talking about today, is the actual tax rates. So while it doesn't go into effect until 2026, what you're going to find is it's going to be similar to 25. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the actual tax rates that you pay taxes on. In the United States, we pay on a graduated income tax rate. So it's not like you're paying at the 32% or the 24%. So you might hear I'm in the 24% bracket, but that doesn't mean that everything is at the 24%. We pay graduated. So for the first portion of your income, it's 10%, then 12%, then 22, then 24, then 32, then 35, and then 37. Well, those rates are actually decreased from what was the permanent rates that were in play prior to 2018. So if we rewind a little bit and we go back into 2018 when the TICJA was passed, that enacted a temporary, 10-year temporary, short-term reduction on interest rates. This is the biggest impact that you've felt through these last several years to lower taxes. It's just that you're getting charged a lower tax rate. Instead of being at 25, you're in the 22. Instead of being at the 15, you're in the 12. So it's a decrease just across the board. The scary thing is, up until they passed this new law, that was set to go away at the end of 25. So we have been tax planning and talking about the ramifications and the consideration as to whether we needed to be doing some things to pull in income tax in income this year or last year or the year before because it was at a low rate, not knowing if it was going to go back up to what it was. Now, if you're my client, I've actually been kind of anticipating this for a while, that it probably wasn't going to go up. It was probably similar. So we weren't jumping up and down and saying we had to pull a ton of income back because that didn't necessarily make sense. But we were saying that we're at a relatively low tax bracket overall. And I'm going to continue to hold to that. So while right now it is a permanently reduced rate, you and I both know how permanent the federal government is. Now, do I think it's going to be difficult to change this? I do. But do I feel that we are in a lower than normal tax brackets for now, for the foreseeable future? Yes, until we all know that it's going to come down the road, right? But from between you and I, the benefit that we get to have is now more stabilized planning. That's perhaps the biggest win of this particular section of the OBB, is that it's not temporary anymore, it's permanent. We get to have some stability. We get to be able to plan knowing what it's going to be, not what it could be this year, maybe different next year, possibly more the following year. We now know it's permanently in place. Again, I'm anticipating that while it's permanent, it's not really permanent, but it's around long enough for us to have some stable tax planning in multi-year tax planning strategy sessions that we do. Some of the other benefits that I'm going to also kind of lump in with this group are related to the permanent nature now of the increased standard deduction and not the return of the personal exemptions. Again, if we reverse back to prior to 2018, if you remember, we had standard deductions that were lower. You had to pull all your itemized things together. You had to pull your charitable contributions and your property taxes and all that. And then we had personal exemptions and standard deductions and just lots of different complications. That is now continues to be gone. They eliminated that in 2018, but it was based on a temporary measure. It is now permanent. That increased standard deduction, so if you're married and filing jointly, it's $31,500, that stays there. So for most individuals, having to track all those separate receipts doesn't apply anymore, which is great. We love that. It makes it simpler for most individuals, and that's ultimately what the goal of this whole tax change was. So that's now made permanent and should be that way going forward. So what are the key takeaways? Stability and knowing that for at least the near term, that it's permanently lowered tax rates. You can hear the skepticism in my voice on how long I really feel that this rate is going to stay low, because quite frankly, the government has written some very large checks here, and we know eventually it's going to have to come and they're going to have to deal with this. But at least currently, under the new law, we can plan and have some stability to know that in the near term, we are going to have lower rates, and we should take advantage of these lower rates to make sure that we're paying at the proper rates and proper amounts that we're calculating in. And it allows us to have some stable, long-term tax planning. So what does that mean to you? Well, do some tax planning. Try to decide what makes sense. Should we be paying some taxes now? Should we be paying some in the future? We don't have some urgencies that we had in the last couple of years of trying to worry whether it was going to go away or not go away. We know it's here to stay now. And so make that plan and know and follow through on that plan. Talk to your CPA, figure it out, and make moves before the end of the year, this year and next year, if you are in fact going to make some permanent moves. Now, for your reference, you already saw it, but we have the slides there of showing you the tax bracket and the tax rates. You're going to hear me say multiple times in tax planning, know your rate. If you're normally in the 32% bracket, you should be tax planning around the 32% tax bracket. If you're normally in the 12% bracket, you should be tax planning around the 12%, and for the 22 and the 24 or wherever you are. Because if you're in the 32, you're going to have different advice and different things that apply to you than if you're in the 12 and in the 22. And if you're normally in the 32 and you end up in the 12, it's not necessarily a good thing. Sure, we might take advantage of it, but that's the time to do some other tax planning to go with it. Or if you're in the 12% and you happen to end up in the 32%, well, we better do some things that particular year to keep us back into what we normally are. Again, you're talking to an accountant here. I like things steady and boring and consistent. We now have that ability to be steady and boring and consistent and use that to our advantage. So talk to your accountant, make that plan, and stick with it. Well, thank you for joining me for today for this first of the several of these editions. In the next video, we're going to be talking about what I believe is probably the most impactful and currently immediacy of it is the overtime in tips and the tax related to that. In preview, it's now tax-free on those two. So overtime and tips are tax-free. Join us in the next video as I talk through those.